Welcome back to The Explainer. So skip the usual agenda today because we are jumping right into a totally magical and honestly kind of bizarre reality. I mean, imagine an entire city, the legendary Queen of the Adriatic Sea, built completely over the water. We're talking about a place that stood for over 1,000 years, and it's not sitting on solid rock. Nope, it is built on what should be an absolutely impossible foundation. So today, we're going to unpack the hidden engineering and those crazy daily survival secrets of Venice. It's a city that literally defies all conventional logic.
But, before we get our hands dirty with all that muddy engineering, let's just ground ourselves in what it's actually like to experience this incredible place today. So, here's a quirky local rule for you. Drink your espresso standing up. Don't order one and then sit down. That kind of perfectly captures the whole rhythm of daily Venetian life. In a city that's just loaded with history, they have the world's oldest continuously operating cafe right in a public square. Space and time are just navigated totally differently. You walk in, you take your espresso standing at the counter, and boom, you move on.
All right, let's really dive into this. If you travel to Venice today, you're going to quickly realize just how totally different this city is from anywhere else. Imagine having to park your car in a massive public lot and just leaving it there for days while you take boats everywhere. See, Venice is a fully functioning 1,000-year-old city. It's got banks, cafes, homes, the whole shebang. But it has absolutely zero roads and zero cars. Once you're in, you are completely dependent on boats, moving between stations almost exactly like you'd navigate a subway system. They even have these wooden poles sticking out of the water just to tie up boats in the parking areas. And hey, the cost of visiting this floating marvel? Yeah, try around 450 euros for a single night in a Canal View Airbnb. Crazy, right? Because Venice is such a massive global tourist magnet, this really fascinating economic shift has taken place. A lot of native Venetians actually end up leaving their historic homes just to rent them out by the day to the endless wave of tourists. It's an incredibly lucrative trade, sure, but it's also a big reason why a lot of the younger locals have just left the city altogether. Now, just navigating this tourist maze is an adventure all on its own. The islands of Venice are spaced apart by 176 different water canals, and then they're stitched all back together by over 400 bridges. People literally walk over these every single day. You've got the famous Rialto Bridge, which was built way back in the 16th century, and then there's the massive Liberty Bridge stretching almost 4 kilometers just to connect the historic city to the Italian mainland. Getting around means hopping on a boat, like, dropping 90 euros for a 30-minute ride on one of those signature gondolas. Or you can just sit at a restaurant right by a canal and eat your meal. Fun fact, sometimes tourists have actually ended up with a giant plush teddy bear sitting at the table for company. Oh, and absolutely everything, even the city's garbage collection, is done using boats to transport waste back to the mainland. Okay, so here's the crucial point. We see the romance, we see the pricey Airbnbs, the bustling canals, but let's sharply pivot to the gritty reality underneath all of that. How do you build a heavy stone city on a muddy swamp? Because the ground in Venice was originally just a marsh, literally a muddy swampland that couldn't support any significant weight at all. So how on earth did anyone manage to build massive stone structures and banks and theaters right over the sea? Well, to understand the how, we really have to understand the why. Like, why would anyone look at a swamp and say, let's build a city here? The origins of Venice actually tell a story of absolute desperation. Back in the early 5th century AD, the Roman Empire was collapsing, and as Hun tribes were brutally invading northern Italy, just destroying cities left and right, terrified refugees had nowhere else to turn. So they fled to the tiny, muddy islands of the Venetian marshes just to hide. This wasn't some luxury real estate choice, it was a desperate bid for survival.
Number 1. The upside-down wooden forest, Venice's foundations.
What they did here is basically a 1,500-year-old architectural masterclass. Step 1. Those refugees turned engineers imported immensely strong timber from Croatia. They drove these massive wooden pillars deep into the marsh. We're talking 5 meters down until they finally hit a solid layer of earth. Millions of these pillars were embedded right into the mud. Then, step 2, they laid flat wooden planks horizontally across the top of those pillars. This was absolutely crucial to evenly distribute the massive weight of the buildings above. And finally, step 3, they constructed the actual base of the houses using Istrian stone, which is this very specific type of highly water-resistant rock.
Now, right about now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, doesn't wood rot underwater? And this brilliantly illustrates the scientific magic of Venice. Petrified wood. See, because these millions of wooden pillars were driven so deep into the mud and completely submerged in water, they were totally deprived of oxygen. And without oxygen, bacteria and fungi just can't survive to rot the wood. So over the centuries, the minerals in the water essentially turn the wood stone-like. It's wild. This invisible, upside-down, petrified forest is the sole reason Venice has managed to remain standing for over a millennium.
Number 2. The secret rainwater filters, a hidden water system. So moving on to daily survival, there's this terrifying irony about Venice. You are completely surrounded by the sea, but not a single drop is actually drinkable. The water in the Venetian lagoon is incredibly salty, and honestly, as we'll see in a minute, it's not exactly clean either. Obviously, you cannot survive without fresh water, so the Venetians had to engineer a solution basically out of thin air, or actually out of the rain.
The Venetians literally turned their public squares into giant secret water filtration machines. It's like a giant puzzle, and here's how they solved it step by step. First, they dug massive reservoirs directly beneath the public plazas and lined them with a super thick layer of clay to stop any of that salty seawater from seeping in. Second, they filled these huge underground bowls with sand and gravel. And finally, they paved the actual public square on a slight slope. So when it rained, the water would hit the slanted pavement, run right into these specific small openings, filter all the way down through the sand and gravel to get purified, and then neatly collect right in the center as perfectly clean drinking water. Talk about a game changer.
This ingenious method was replicated all across the city, eventually giving them around 600 freshwater wells. And that system sustained the entire city for centuries. Today, of course, things are a bit easier. Drinkable water is piped in daily from the mainland through a huge pipeline system, so those old wells have essentially been retired. Now they just serve as these beautiful decorative stone monuments sitting right in the middle of Venice's squares.
Number 3. The truth about the sewers, the unseen reality.
All right, so we've covered the foundations and the drinking water, but brace yourselves, because here is a rather shocking, unseen truth for a modern, world-famous city. Venice still does not have a fully centralized sewage system. Yep, you heard that right. Back in the 16th century, they dug these stone tunnels beneath the streets called gattelli, and these tunnels simply carried wastewater from the houses and dumped it directly into the canals. Fast forward to the 1990s, and sure, they finally began installing modern sewage tanks beneath some of the buildings. But because of the city's unique structure, a massive number of historic homes just couldn't be retrofitted.
Which brings us to a pretty bold truth. Those highly romantic, beautifully scenic canals that you pay €90 to ride a gondola through? Yep, they still act as the city's active sewers. Because so many homes still discharge directly into the water, the city has to rely entirely on nature's plumbing. Twice a day, the tides of the Adriatic Sea rush in and flush the canals out. But just a quick word of warning for any future tourists out there, during the brutal summer heat, or when the tide gets really, really low, well, the smell of that reality becomes very, very noticeable.
So, let's pull all of these incredible pieces together. We're looking at a city born from the absolute desperation of fleeing refugees. It's held up by millions of petrified tree trunks shipped in from Croatia. It was sustained for centuries by public squares that actually doubled as giant rainwater filters, and it's kept clean, well, mostly clean, by the daily flushing tides of the sea. It really is an absolute masterpiece of human ingenuity and survival. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this one thing. This invisible wooden forest has bravely carried this floating marvel for over 1,000 years. But with rising sea levels and the overwhelming pressure of modern tourism, how much longer can this bizarre, beautiful city really survive?